Hi, I'm Rick Roller, and welcome to the Institute of Real Estate Education's live review class. These classes are going to be offered every other Tuesday starting today. This is the first one, so you're here at the beginning. The purposes of these classes is to go through a topic for the evening, teach you a few things about that I know that are going to be very important for you for the exam, and then also to allow you to ask questions about those topics or any other topic that you might have some confusion on. So this is your chance to talk to your live instructor and get your questions answered. And then as we go through the topics tonight, we'll also look at some sample test questions and give you some insights to what you're going to be experiencing in hopefully the not too distant future as you pass the exam. And then we're going to end tonight's little session. It should be about an hour or so long with some practical tips to help you as you get started in the real estate business. My name is Rick Roller, and I'll be your host for tonight. I'm a longtime real estate instructor and a longtime real estate broker as well, over 43 years of experience. And I'm really looking forward to this class. It's going to be really fun. With us here tonight also is Mr. Dan Naylor, who is the president of the Institute of Real Estate Education, and he'll be helping with some of the technical aspects of the program tonight, as well as chiming in occasionally in order to get more response from you and to make this a very valuable thing for you. For tonight's topic, we're going to be working on appraisal issues, and I'm taking the outline of what I'm going to be talking about from this document. Now, what is this document? This is the general exam content outline for salespeople and brokers direct from Pearson VUE. Now, you can go to the Pearson VUE website and you can download this document. Make sure you download the one for Utah because they vary from state to state a little bit. But also, this is really, really important because what it does is it goes through all the different national topics and some of the state topics that you'll be experiencing at sometime in the recent future. And why that's so valuable is, like for tonight, this is under the category of property value and appraisal. And it tells you right here that for the sales exam, there's going to be 11 questions. And on the broker's exam, there's going to be 10 questions on these topics. So that's why this is so important, because not only does it give you the outline of what you're going to have to really know to pass the exam successfully, but it gives you the weight of the topics as well. You don't want to be spending hours and hours immersing yourself into a topic like, land description and find out there's only 2 questions about that, so it allows you to be more strategic in your study. But tonight, boy, we've got a great group here with us, and we're going to kind of jump right in. There's some of you that are, you've got your names up here. Welcome, Tiva. We got Johnny. We got Melanie, Melindy, Joseph. We've got, and then of course Dan and I are on. Then we have some of you that have some other names on here as well that are not really names. I guess they're just your pen name or whatever. But if you want to ask questions, you can activate the video part of your side of this Zoom, or you can also chat them in. And Dan will be monitoring the chats so we can make sure we get your questions answered. Okay, so let's jump right to that outline. You don't need the outline in front of you for tonight because I'll talk about the different concepts as we go through. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the concept of value, because we are talking about appraisal after all. And the first concept about value in the Pearson VUE outline is market value versus market price. Now, market value is a defined term, and we'll get into the essential elements of that. We'll talk about that in more detail in just a moment. But market price is what somebody paid for something. I mean, all of you do comparison shopping. And so sometimes you get a really good screaming deal on something, and what you paid for that something is the market price. Does it have anything to do with the value? Well, if you overpaid for something, then obviously the market value would be less than what you paid, which would be the market price. If you underpaid for something or got a screaming deal on it, then the market price would be much lower than the market value. So there is a difference between market value and market price. And we'll define that right now as we get into the characteristics of value. Now, you remember that occasionally there's some really cool mnemonic devices that will help you in remembering what some of these characteristics or essential elements or even the nature of value are. And the mnemonic device is DUST, D-U-S-T, DUST, because the beginning letter in each one of those words is one of the essential elements of value. And so we have demand, that's the D, U is utility, S is scarcity, and T is transferability. So it's demand, utility, scarcity, and transferability. Now, what's important about all this? Well, the first thing is that all of those four essential elements of value must be present. They must be there or there is no value. Let's talk about it. Let's say that you own a parcel of property in a ghost town. I mean, it was a thriving metropolis at some time, but as the years went by, everyone moved away. There were no jobs or other problems with the area. Maybe they moved away because it was a brownfield type property where it was contaminated, so people left. And so you own a property there, that's great. Does it have any utility or usefulness? Well, you could probably live there, you know, so it has utility to a certain degree. Is there scarcity? Well, it kind of depends. Scarcity refers to an economic principle called supply and demand. And what that means is that if there's a huge supply and there's no demand, okay, then of course we have a much lower value. And so scarcity is important, and then transferability, your ability to transfer it, to give it to someone else, for them to buy it and for you to sell it. Sometimes you run into a situation where someone has really mucked up their title, or their title has become difficult for one reason or another. There's liens on it, there's problems with it, perhaps there's encroachments against it, and you know, and there's problems with the title. Maybe the title was put into your name by an owner, a grantor, that signed a deed, and he did like I did one time. I sold one of my properties and I signed the deed Rick Roller. Well, that's fine because I am Rick Roller, but unfortunately the owner of the property was Richard R. Roller. Well, that creates a cloud on the title, and it can easily be cleaned up by just getting a hold of me and getting me to sign a correction deed. Probably most commonly used would be a quitclaim deed, and that would clear that up. So because future owners may not know that Rick Roller is the same person as Richard R. Roller, and so that's a title defect. And some title defects are much more severe than others. And if you have serious title defects, well, obviously it's going to affect your transferability. Another thing that could affect your transferability is a long-term lease. If you leased your property out to someone for 5 or 10 years, let's say it's a commercial property, and that tenant has a 5 or maybe even a 10-year lease and has the right to keep and use that property, you could sell your property. You could sell it to another investor. But have you affected the transferability and possibly the value of that property? Well, of course you have. You may have affected it positively, because if that tenant is paying a lot of rent, that might be the reason why this new investor wants to come and buy your property. Or if you put in a long-term lease at a very low rate of return, that's going to affect your value of that property as well. So once again, the 4 elements: demand, there must be someone that wants it, a reasonable number of people that want it in any period of time; utility or usefulness; scarcity, and that talks about supply and demand as well; and then of course transferability, the ability to sell to someone else. So the important thing about this, the wake-up item for this particular concept, is that in order for there to be value, all 4 elements must be there. And to the extent they are affected, you could definitely affect the value. Now, sometimes we say that there's different types of value. And this is the next thing in your outline when we start talking about the characteristics of value. And what we're talking about here is that there's value in exchange, value in exchange, value in use, and then there's fair market value, okay? Fair market value. Now, value in exchange is what we call objective, and this is the key here, the wake-up item. Value in exchange is objective value. And otherwise, it takes the point of view of the purchaser. You see, reasonable purchasers don't overpay for things typically because they comparison shop. Well, how do we know this house is worth $750,000? Because they've looked at a dozen different properties between 700 and 800,000, and they figure, yeah, it's about where this one would fall in there. In other words, they comparison shop. And that tends to be objective. But it is the point of view of the purchaser, isn't it? And value in exchange most accurately reflects what we in the industry call market value. See, this is all important because most people don't pay cash. Most people get a loan. And to get a loan, you're going to have to get an appraisal. And the appraiser is going to come out and he's going to look at it, and he or she, and they're going to come up with what they're trying to come up with is market value. Now, sometimes the market value is less than what was paid for a property, and sometimes it's more. And we'll talk about that a little bit when we talk about types of reports that appraisal might use, but that's value in exchange. And it most closely would resemble the price paid for that type of property recently. What are they going for? And once again, it gets back to how much would a knowledgeable buyer, without having any duress, pay for that property who understands value because they've done some comparison shopping. That's value in exchange. It's kind of what you can get in the marketplace. Now contrast that with something called value in use. Value in use is subjective. It might be worth more than to somebody than to somebody else. Recently, my wife and I went on a little excursion, and we were looking for the house that her grandfather built in a sugar house area here in Salt Lake City. And her mother, who's passed away, told her daughter, my wife, many times about the efforts that her dad put in that house and how much it meant to him and how much it meant to her growing up there her whole life. And she was sharing this with her daughter, but her daughter had never really seen the property. So we looked it up, we did some research, we found out where it was, we drove by, and it was for sale. Okay, now my daughter, my wife, who is the daughter of the woman whose dad built the house, right, had felt like she had kind of an emotional attachment to that house. And we made an offer on it, just, you know, because she wanted to buy it. So we made an offer on it, and it wasn't accepted. And I said, well, are you willing to pay a little bit more for it? And my wife, bless her heart, reverted back to value in exchange. In other words, she wasn't going to pay more for that house than what she thought it was worth the other similar houses in that area. Now, had her emotions kicked in, and for her, it was worth more because it was a family home that she was restoring back into the family cadre of properties that we own, then she may have paid more for it. But that's an emotional thing, isn't it? So value and use might be emotional, but it doesn't have to be emotional, okay? Let's talk about Disneyland for a minute. If you owned Disneyland and you needed more parking lots, where would the best place to buy those parking lots be? To the properties that were contiguous to your property. And of course, what would those owners say? Oh, well, you're Disney and you want to buy my property because you want to increase your parking lot. Yeah, that's what we want to do. And that owner might say, well, I'll tell you what, I'll sell it to you for this much, which is more than the market value. And that company, Disney, may choose to pay more for that because it's worth more to them to have a continuous parking lot than it is to have several different parking lots separated by a lot of different properties and running trams back and forth down public streets in order to get people into Disneyland. And so to one person, now, would that you know, and typically there's something called assemblage. An assemblage is where a developer is going in and you're buying several contiguous properties with the idea that the larger property they bought, these 4 or 5 pieces put together, is what they needed in order to put a building there or some type of development. It could just be a residential subdivision, but it might be a commercial property of one kind or another. And so it's very important for them to get all those contiguous pieces. That's called assemblage. It's called assemblage if they can buy all those pieces and the increase in value by having a bigger property occurs. So the overall larger piece is worth more than the individual pieces that were assembled together. That would be an acceptable assemblage. And we see it happen all the time. And so they do cost down averaging. Recently here in Salt Lake City, as you come off the 6 South exit to get into downtown Salt Lake, there was a whole block that was assembled by a group of developers, and there was one piece in the corner that they still needed to get, and they ended up paying like 2 or 3 times more for that than they did for all the other parcels that they had been assembling. But you know, it's hard to buy out a whole block without people finding out what's going on. And so the current owner who owned that one commercial property kind of held out and put a higher price on it. And that was value and use for that person, right? The developer for that area wanted that corner piece so that they had the whole thing all beautified, and you know, I mean, and they needed it in order to make their development work. And of course, they use cost averaging. You know, we paid little for these when no one knew where we were. We paid more for those, but overall, our cost per square foot is still within line of what we feel that we can pay in order to make this work. Okay, so some concepts there. Value and use is subjective. It's determined by the seller and often involves emotions, which sometimes can distort the value. But it doesn't have to involve emotions. It just can, but it's not a requirement. And so that's value and use. Now, excuse me, when an appraiser comes in, is he looking for value in exchange or value in use? Probably closer to value in exchange. But what the appraiser is going to call it is fair market value. Fair market value. Because the appraiser is going to look for properties that were sold by a willing buyer and bought by a willing seller, where neither the buyer or seller was under any kind of duress. You know, you can't hold a gun to their head, or, you know, they for either buyer or a seller, either way. And the property had been on the market for a sufficient amount of time for the seller to discover the approximated value. So that's fair market value. And the wake-up item on fair market value is, of course, you have a willing buyer, a willing seller, and you have to throw the concept of knowledgeable in there. I mean, we've all heard about the California buyer rolled into Salt Lake City or anywhere in Utah and said, whoa, these houses are so cheap compared to what they are out on the coast. Can't believe it. I just sold my little bungalow in Long Beach, you know, for $900,000, and this house is 4 times the size. That's a tremendous value. I'm going to pay cash, and I'll pay you this big price for it. And he overpaid, perhaps, okay, because he was comparing it to a whole different market. Well, that's not a knowledgeable buyer. An example of a seller who wasn't knowledgeable might be someone who's living out of state and they inherited a property that their parents owned or their grandparents owned. And so someone calls them on the phone and say, hey, I see there was a death in your family. I'm sorry, but I'd sure like to buy that house and I'll pay this much for it. And they say, oh, gosh, that sounds like a pretty good price. And you'll pay cash and you'll close this week? Absolutely, great. And maybe they undersold that by a whole lot, you know, because they weren't familiar with values here in the Utah area and how they've expanded, you know, and have they gone up rapidly. So knowledgeable is important on either end of the deal, whether you're a buyer or a seller, because that would be the closest to what we call fair market value. Now, going back to the outline, there's a question in here and it talks about, well, what is the difference between, or a concept, what's the difference between market value, which we just defined, you know, willing, knowledgeable, no duress, reasonable marketing period, and market price. Market price is what they paid. If they overpaid, they paid market price perhaps, but not a knowledgeable one, or if they undersold the same thing. Okay? So let's now move into down the outline. We're going to talk about a few of the principles of value. And one of these is called highest and best use. Now, sometimes you have properties that are used for one thing, but they were in a developing area and they would have a greater value if they were used for something else. You know, for example, a little bungalow in some area where there's a lot of commercial activity might have more value as an office building or a site for office buildings, especially if you can buy the 3 or 4 around it, than it does as a single family house. And that would be highest and best use. Now, what an appraiser is trying to do when they come in is they're trying to look at what would the highest and best use be for this property. Would it be a development or would it be something else? Years ago, I sold a 10-acre pig farm to a syndicator, and he was able to buy that. It was a 10-acre farm, and he was able to buy that for $100,000. He paid $10,000 an acre. The reason why I suggested he buy that particular property is because I knew, because of contacts that I had, that a new regional mall was coming into the town where I was working, and it would be very close to this pig farm, and in fact, just across the street. And so he bought the property for $10,000 an acre. And once the mall was announced about 8, 9, 10 months, a year later, all of a sudden those land values, jumped up to about $1.50 a square foot. Now there's 43,560 square feet in an acre. And of course, he paid $10,000 for one of those acres, right? But if that's now worth $1.50 a foot, what was it worth now just when the mall got, and it hadn't been built yet, it was just announced that this is where it's going to go. Well, $1.50 a foot, 43,560 is $1, and add another 20-some thousand. That property went from 10,000 acres to over $60,000 an acre. Of course, you had to change the zoning and whatnot, but that wasn't difficult once the mall got underway. And once the mall got underway, it went to 3, and we sold some of the last pieces of that for about almost $4 a square foot. Pretty good. I mean, if you can put together deals like that, you're going to be, become their favorite realtor real fast. But what we're talking about here is a change and a highest and best use. And an appraiser is going to have to go out there and make an evaluation. If there's there's a lot of different factors in that. I mean, I don't want to dig into it too deep, but that's what highest and, it's self-explanatory, highest and best use, okay? So the appraiser is going to have to go out there and consider what is the highest and best use. Okay, another principle that you will always see on the exam is the principle of substitution. Why? Because it is the foundation of one of the approaches to value, and that approach is called well, maybe I'll talk about that when I get there. But really, it's the comparison approach. Well, obviously, substitution is comparison shopping, like I mentioned earlier. It's that principle where a buyer won't pay more than they have to because they can get the utility they want for about this much price. And how do they know? They've looked at more than one house. And so they looked at a number of houses, and they keep making offers. And I know in this market, we're currently still experiencing a shortage of inventory, and so you'll probably be involved right off the bat in some multiple offer type situations. And some buyers can get a little frustrated from time to time. I understand that, but still, they're not going to be an idiot and overpay by tremendous amounts of monies, because it's not going to appraise. And if they're not paying cash, then it's going to get difficult to get a loan on that, because the lender's only going to lend fair market value on that property. But the principle of substitution says that no prudent person will pay more for something that he has to. I mean, very, very simple. It's just comparison shopping. Okay, another principle that is important is principle of contribution. And we see this violated all the time. I mean, you're remodeling your home and you put things in your home that you like. Years ago, I remodeled my master bathroom, And I wanted a steam shower. So I went out and bought a $2,500 steam shower and had it all plumbed in and everything, and did the special surround and the door that would close it off, and the toe tester. So all kinds of things we had to put in there. And all in all, it probably was about a $3,500 job. And of course, my value of my home jumped up $3,500, right? Go like this. No, it did not. We all put things on our houses that we like that don't necessarily increase the fair market value. And when we do that, we violate the principle of contribution. Right now, my daughter is investing in a property and she's remodeling it. And it's a great little property in Murray. She wants to make a rental out of it. And she was debating on what countertops to put in. You know, should I go for mica? Should I go something else like granite, stone? Should I put in tile? And I said, how much more rent would you get out of that property if you put in a granite countertop? She says, probably not a lot more. You know, you won't get any more in rent. Now, it may rent a lot quicker if it has a beautiful granite countertop. But if the granite countertop is going to cost you, $4,500, $5,000 in order to install, you're going to be violating the principle of contribution. Now, we all do it, and we probably do it more on the homes we want to live in, and we're probably a little more thrifty. And she decided to go with the thrifty method, actually found a used countertop at the Restore that she's going to put in it, and it'll be just fine. And it was stone, so she got the stone for $700, so which was about what she'd have to pay for the Formica anyway. So thrifty shopper. So she didn't violate the principle of contribution, but every component you put into a property needs to increase it to the value of what it costs you there. Okay. Let me see a couple more principles. I know that you're going to see. Anticipation. This is an interesting one. People are really down on an area. There's some areas where, well, right now, Vernal is suffering a little bit because oil prices are so low. And when oil prices are so low in the Vernal area, there's less exploration, there's less development. They say the oil patch dries up. And when the oil patch dries up in Vernal, prices go down, because that's one of the major employers for that particular market. And so what happens is, if people feel like that's happening, they're anticipating a downtrend in a market because of the low oil prices, then, and shale oil and fracking isn't going on like it was before. And so what happens is maybe they're just anticipating that's going to happen, but it hasn't really happened entirely yet. Like there's still some employment and whatnot, but maybe the market is crashing faster than what the actual elements of the justification aren't really shown there. And so they're anticipating it's going to go lower, so they keep dropping the prices quicker in order to get out. Now, you see it more often happening along the Wasatch Front, is everyone anticipate things are going to get higher and higher and higher, because that's what's been happening for the last 6-7 years. And so what happens is, well, I'm not going to sell it for that. I think I can get more for it. And so they keep pushing their prices up. And because they anticipate that more and more people are coming. And in our area, that's actually been happening. But still, the principle of anticipation, either they anticipate something really bad's going to happen, so the prices stop dropping, even though maybe that something bad hasn't happened yet, or they anticipate something really good is going to happen. So it can influence it either way. The wake-up item and key here is the fact that it's like that mall. The mall wasn't there yet, even though it had been announced. And sometimes things happen. Maybe they lost their funding, and so they anticipated it was coming, so the prices jumped up. But it never really happened because they couldn't get the funding, or something else happened, or they reined it back in. So, that would be an excellent, that mall property that went up, the pig farm that went up, would be a really good example of that as well. Okay. A principle of competition is another appraisal principle, and that says that excess competition creates ruinous results. Okay, it can destroy a market, so what we're seeing happening now is, if it's called being overbuilt. Now, look, folks, practical note here. You can make money in a seller's market like we're in now. You can make money in a buyer's market like we were after the fall in about 2008. You can make money either way. You have to kind of change a little bit about the way you're working and how you're going about your work. But you're an adaptable genius. You'll find that you can work either side of the street. Whether it's a buyer's market or a seller's market, folks, it's still going to be a realtor's market. In fact, buyer's markets, people tend to use realtors more often, or people, licensees like us more often than in a seller's market. If you're constantly having people knock on your door saying, hey, might you be interested in selling your property? I'd love to live in this neighborhood. You have a beautiful home and I'd be happy to buy it from you for a really high price because I'm tired of not being able to get anything. And I want to live here, so I'm knocking on the doors. Well, that's a very motivated cash type buyer maybe, and so the sellers figure, well, I don't need a real estate agent, so I can just sell it direct to the public. And so there's pros and cons to each kind of market, but whether it's a buyer's market or seller's market, it's still a realtor's market. Hey, this is the most important investment that these people will probably have in their lives. And there's so many pitfalls in a transaction that the state of Utah requires you to learn all this stuff and get a license so that the public has a reasonable chance of getting a great deal done. And so that's kind of how that works. Okay, now let's talk about this assemblage, and there's another term I want to introduce here called plottage. Remember I talked about an assemblage and you actually made an increase in value? You took 4 parcels of property, maybe you paid $25,000 each, and now you have a bigger parcel. It's 4 times as big as the one you started with, and you paid $100,000 for them, but it's now worth $150,000. Well, that's the way it's supposed to work, isn't it? And so what happens is the assemblage is worth more than what you paid. If that happens, we have another term for that. Now, if you assembled those and you lost value, you paid 150 and they're only worth 100, but you still wanted to go ahead with your project because it would still make sense even though you paid too much for the land, okay? That's an assemblage, but it's not this other word. And this other word does show up on the exam, and it's called plottage. Plottage is where you do an assemblage and you have an increase in value. So assemblage could have, 2 faces. One, you made money, and that has a special name called plottage, and the other, you didn't do so well. But hey, it's okay. You needed that much property for your project, and your property still pencils out, your project does, and it's still going to make sense. And maybe if it doesn't make economic sense, it makes emotional sense. Sometimes you just wanted those 2 lots because it, that was just what you wanted. And you wanted something big, and you wanted a nice, beautiful, big home, and you wanted a nice, big, beautiful play garage as well. And to you, it was worth the money. So, but that's not a plottage because it's worth probably less than what you paid for it by putting it together. Okay. So if you're doing commercial properties, you probably not want to go down that road a little bit. Okay, back to our outline. Okay, we're talking about characteristics of value. Remember DUST, D-U-S-T, demand, utility, scarcity, transferability, and some of the principles of value that we've gone through now. Okay, so let's get into another one. Let's talk about the process of appraisal. Now, appraisers, have to be licensed, and we have federal requirements that are required for these licenses as well. Now, the federal government allows appraisers to be licensed on a state status from one state to another. There is a national portion of the test, just like your real estate exam, that's the same in all 50 states. And then there's some state portions as well. And so, but that appraisal license is administered by the states. And so you can get a license. Appraisers have to have a license in order to do appraisals and call what they do an appraisal, okay? And their standards. The standards that they go by are called USPAP, USPAP. and it's some uniform standards of the appraisal practice. And in other words, the federal government's come out and said, this is what an appraisal needs to look like, and this is what should be included in it. And you have to be licensed to do this, and you have to take a test, and you have to be regulated by the states, and you have to have continuing ed, just kind of like we have in real estate as well. And that's all well and good. But there's also another thing that can happen that it shows up on the exam, and that's called BPOs, broker price opinions. Now, because you have, or will have shortly, a real estate license, you are licensed to practice real estate in the state of Utah. And that license allows you to practice all kinds of real estate. I mean, land, homes, commercial buildings, leasing activities, 1031 exchanging, all kinds of different things that you can do, management of properties. And you can do that with your license. Now, if you're getting into any of these specialties and disciplines, there's things you need to know. You need to work for a broker, of course, when you're starting. And you'll be a licensed agent, but you need to work for principal broker, we call them in our state. And they can help you and guide you in those areas. And there's special classes that you can take to increase your expertise, which I strongly recommend you do, because you'll just be a better agent. Better agents provide better service. That gets around and you have more deals. Those deals bring you more deals. And if you're an expert in your field, you know, that's, you're going to do well, you know, and you can do well. We'll talk about that when we end up in this program a little bit later. Okay. So, but there's some steps to an appraisal. So the appraiser comes out and there's about 6 steps. The first step is he or she has to define the problem. I mean, what is the purpose of this appraisal? Most appraisals are done because a bank wants to know what the fair market value is. But some of them are done for estate purposes. Some of them are done for other reasons as well, tax purposes. Or, and what I mean by tax purposes is sometimes you wanted to get an appraisal on your property because you feel like the county assessor has overassessed it and you're paying too much in property taxes. So you might order an appraisal, and the appraiser comes out and says, okay, what am I being asked to do here? But most commonly, it probably falls under some definition of fair market value. But sometimes an appraiser might come out to determine how much your lease is worth. You know, that long-term lease you had on a property, that can actually have some intrinsic value of its own if the market rent is much higher than what you're paying in your lease agreement. Hey, you have some value actually in your lease, and an appraiser can come out and determine that as well. Sometimes you order an appraisal because UDOT, you know, the Utah Department of Transportation is coming in and they want to take part or all of your property for a street expansion or something like that. And they're saying they feel it's worth this. And of course, you might want to get an appraisal because it's maybe you think it's worth something like that and they think it's something like this. I've worked on a number of those, but not as an appraiser, as a broker doing what's called a broker price opinion. Now, when you're doing a broker price opinion, we have a specific exemption in the law because the law in Utah says that all appraisers must be licensed. But if you're a licensed sales agent or broker in the state of Utah, then there's a specific exemption which allows you to do these broker price opinions without having an appraisal license. Now, it must be in alignment with your normal business activities. In other words, you can't go out and do cut rate appraisals for you know, lenders and that sort of thing. And they're not going to do that anyway. I mean, the only time you might work for a lender on appraising properties is if it's something they've foreclosed on. And they don't need a full-blown appraisal. They just want a broker's price opinion in order to determine what it's worth. And you can do those. Couple of keys here. Number one, you must always be paid any compensation you're getting for a licensed activity, and that would certainly be a licensed activity. That's why you can do it. You have a real estate license, and you're specifically exempted from needing an appraisal license. You must always be paid through your broker. So if the bank's offering you a couple of $100, that has to go to your broker. Then you and your broker have to determine how much of that you get and how much she or he gets, okay? So you must always be paid directly through your broker. Okay, and that might be a test item as well. But that's called a broker price opinion, and that might be something that you get involved with sometimes. Right now, It used to be a real popular way when banks had a lot of foreclosures of endearing yourself to those banks. You do hundreds of those for the, for 50 or 20 or 30. And they always say, I'll list some of these with you now because you've been so helpful in helping us determine what they're worth. But this appraiser's gone out. He's probably looking for fair market value, step one. Step two is he's going to conduct a survey. And usually appraisers do this as they drive out the property. They're familiar with the area. Oh yeah, they're going for about this much. They're thinking about it. Then they start gathering data. They're going to look for sold sales. They're going to classify the data into one of the three approaches to value. So they define a problem, conduct a survey, gather the data, and then they classify it in one of the three approaches to value. And this is a huge wake-up item, okay? The three approaches to value are market data, cost, income, and those are the three values: market data, cost, and income. And every appraisal has to have all these three approaches to value, okay? Then they're going to come up with values based on these three approaches to value, and then they're going to reconcile a value and they're going to issue a report. Real simple, okay? And those are kind of the steps they're going to go through here. Now, the wake-up items for the test, are just having a feel for these steps. But what's really important are these three approaches to value. Each one of these approaches lends itself best to different types of properties. Market data lends itself best to residential because there's so many comps. They're easy to find comparable homes. The cost approach lends itself best to service type properties. Properties that are kind of like oddball, like a school. What's a school worth? Can you find other schools that have sold? How about a church building? Can you find other church buildings that have sold? Not so many comps. So one of the ways we might have to approach what is the value of that property is try to determine what it would cost to rebuild it. Okay, and there's a formula for this. You might want to jot this down. The formula is land plus or minus improvements. Yeah, it's going to be plus improvements. Land, excuse me, plus improvements minus depreciation equals value. Land plus improvements minus depreciation equals value. Now, let's define that. Land, they're going to try to find the cost of the land. Other lots that have sold in the area or other land values. Once they find that, that's good. That's where they start. The cost of improvements, they have cost estimating guys that help them with that. Depreciation has several different faces to it. Depreciation could be normal wear and tear, or just, look, old carpet's not as worth as much as brand new carpet. So if you're looking at a house, you say, well, new carpet would cost this much, but this carpet in this home, man, it's about worn out. So I'm going to depreciate that heavily. New paint's worth more than old paint. So the physical wear and tear is a type of depreciation. Another type of depreciation is called economic. If the main employer for an area has pulled the plug and fired everybody, this house may be in pristine condition, have no physical wear and tear, but because the market's been depressed, he's going to have to depreciate it as well. Okay, so those are different types of depreciation that we might have to look at on a property, and those are the main ones for the test. Okay, so working on our outline, we've done that. Let's talk about some of so that was the first approach. Market data approach is the typical house appraisal where you're going out and finding comps, and you're going to adjust those comps to look more like the subject. So if there's a property and you look at it and it has a fireplace, but your subject, that's the one you're trying to appraise, doesn't have a fireplace, the appraiser is going to have to take some away from that sale in order to make it look more like the subject. So we're finding comps that have sold recently that were similar to the property, and they were they're very close in location. And then we start taking things away if they were better than the subject. Now, if they were inferior to the subject, for example, let's reverse that fireplace example. The subject property has a fireplace, but the comp I found as an appraiser does not. Then I'm going to have to, well, the comp sold for this much. I'm going to have to add a little more because my subject is better. If the subject is inferior, got to take some away. But if it's better, I got to add some. So you have the sold price of the comparable, and then you have to plus or minus the adjustments to that, and then you come up with the fair market value. And the last one is the income approach. Now, the income approach lends itself best to commercial properties because they're based on, the more money it makes, hey, the more money it's worth. Okay, that pretty much goes through our outline. There's what we do is called the broker price opinions, also sometimes called CMAs. Questions about what we talked about, or any questions about this topic or any other topic, you can speak them if you're on the chat, or you can chat them into Dan.
Go ahead and unmute yourselves if you have a question. We did have a couple of questions on the chat that I answered while we were talking. One was if a price is, if someone buys a home that's completely overpriced, does that contribute to the overall market value now of all the properties?
Well, an overpriced property, if it's severely overpriced, an appraiser is going to have to take a close look at that and see if there are some other factors involved there. One of the reasons why a property might be overpriced is because a seller did seller financing. And a house that is seller financed usually can sell for 20, 22, 25% more in some cases, sometimes a little less, but they could sell for more because the buyer was probably in a situation where that's the only thing he could buy because of his poor credit, or he had no credit. So if you want to buy anything, if the seller would take a down payment and carry it, you might get more money for that. So an appraiser has to look at the nature of the sale as well, Dan. And so he's going to take that into consideration. Same thing on something that was underpriced. If there was a distressed sale for one reason or another, an appraiser is going to talk to the agents involved to find out if there was some concept or something that happened where it sold for less than what it should have sold for. And he's going to throw those out. Those aren't good comps. Great question. Another question? Okay, Dan, let's switch to our question, to our test questions. Let's kind of go through those real quick. We'll go through
to bring up any questions as we're talking about these things. Just unmute yourself and ask a question or type it into the chat.
Okay, so is that coming out all right? Now, can you guys see that question? It doesn't look right on.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, all right. So this first one is, which of the following is not one of the essential elements of value? Now, what was a mnemonic device? Dust. D-U-S-T. So demand is there, scarcity is there. So now we got a 50-50 chance. Now, was transferability one of those? Yeah, that was the T. So if you remember dust, D-U-S-T, then obviously our answer is what? Highest and best use. Highest and best use is a principle, but not one of the essential elements of value. Okay?
Okay, we've got a question by chat. Adam asks, how common is seller financing? Because he'd never heard of it until this course.
It's quite common. Now in the overall scheme of things, you might be, less than 10% of the market, but on the other hand, there's some agents that specialize in it. I did one earlier, well, it was early last year. And sometimes if you find a property that's a little bit of a white elephant, you can get rid of it or get a better price out of it by doing seller financing because it increases the number of buyers that can buy it. Excellent question. Thank you.
Wasn't that a lot more common back when the interest rates were a lot higher?
Yeah, now if you can get interest rates below 3%, which is happening all the time, my seller, particularly on his property, it was a $400,000 property. He got $50,000 down from the buyer, and the buyer paid 6% interest and has to refinance after 3 years. So, that's a good example. The seller, the buyer of that property had a couple of credit issues, but with 50 grand down on a $400,000 house, seller felt well secured. Other questions? Okay, Daniel, how do I get to the next?
Just move your mouse over and just click the next one down the side.
Okay, when taking a listing, Agent J had sellers who insisted their house was worth more than the one down the street for sale. Well, of course it is. It's my house. It's worth more. Even though both houses are basically the same, Jay explained that buyers won't pay any more than they have to in order to get what they desire. This is a principle of what, guys? Comparison shopping. Principle of, is it progression? No. Contribution? No. Balance? No. It is a principle of what? Substitution. Very good. Okay. The Y company needed a large parcel of land to relocate their business. They found two parcels next to each other at 80 and 95. They bought them both. Subsequently, they found a better site and sold the two parcels to one buyer for $205. Did they make some money? Yeah. It was an assemblage, but they made money. So this is called a, oh, we even got a red line to help you here. This is called plottage. Okay, pretty good at that. Sightist, the neighborhood cycle, homes go through, I mean, all property go through cycles. You know, they have an integration stage, you go up in value, then the neighborhood ages, and it starts going down in value. Situs is at some location. You've heard that all your life. Okay, which of the following is not an approach to appraisal? Remember, we had cost approach, income, and what? Comparison approach or sales approach. Market data. Plottage is not. That's the assemblage. Now, another thing I want you to understand on cost approach that will help you on the test is cost approach in these three approaches of value is the only one that looks at land separately. Okay? Okay. Okay. I want to finish tonight's session with a couple of, on a practical tip. Okay. Now, folks, if you have additional questions, let me give you my secret cell phone number. It's 801-556-8000. Now, that's my cell phone. I answer it. Call me anytime. Well, don't call me when you're taking the test, but call me anytime other than that. And I'm happy to answer any of your questions on this or any other topic that you have. This is something that that Dan has asked me to do, and I'm happy to do it and to help you understand these topics. Please don't spend 45 minutes trying to read and study and Google and do all these other things when you can pick up the phone and talk to me for 4 or 5 minutes and get to the heart of the issue, particularly as it applies to the test. Okay. 801-556-8000. You're welcome to call.
I put it into the chat. Can we do one more question real quick?
Okay.
What do lenders think of fixer-uppers? How do they lend on those kind of things?
Most lenders, because they sell their loans, have minimum property standards if it's FHA or a VA, or if they're selling it on the secondary market, which virtually all of them do. And so if it's a fixer-upper, sometimes you have to get specialized financing to buy them, and then once they are brought up to that standard, like if you go in the home and all the carpet's torn out, there's holes in the drywall, it's missing the furnace, a lender's not going to lend on that who is a traditional type of lender. Now there are traditional lenders that have some buy and fix up type loans, like an FHA 245. And but these are things you'll learn once you get in the business. It's not really pertinent to the exam, but there are minimum standards for loans. Great question. Thank you. Okay. Practical note as we've been, remember the Olympics in 2002 and how fascinated we were to see these gold, silver, and bronze medals passed out. And sometimes the gold winner, between the gold and the bronze or the silver, was only just fractions of a second. And so that slight edge brought them to the gold. Now, how does that relate to real estate? I want you to understand something as you enter this business. You don't have to be twice as good to get that listing. You don't have to be twice as good to get that buyer and get that sale. Sometimes it's just a slight edge that gets you there. And so by learning things, by knowing things, by being familiar with your contracts, by showing that confidence that lets them have confidence in you, sometimes that slight edge is enough to get you those deals. Now, the other thing I want you to understand about real estate is there is no silver and bronze. Guys, it's winner take all. Winner take all, okay? You either got the listing or you got what? Nothing. You're either first place or you're last place. I mean, there is no participation trophy for real estate, okay? You either win or you don't win. So you need to be ready, and you need to take classes. You need to learn to craft. You need to talk to experienced agents. You need to get good training, and you can do this. You can do this. You can do this. Okay, you don't have to be twice as good. You just have to be a little bit better than the average real estate salesperson. Okay, and you have to work hard. You have to work smart. Now, fact of life, practical note as we end this. Let's talk. Okay, I mean, can we talk? Let's talk. Okay, you've got one chance to make this work. Seriously, put everything you've got into it. Now, what do I mean by you've got one chance? Well, you passed the test, you got your license, you joined the board of realtors. All this is, it costs money. You know, you got cards, you got a better car, or you got car signs, you got whatever you got. Okay, it's, you know, you put a couple $1,000s in this thing to get going. Okay, and I, you know, I had to piecemeal mine, guys. When I started 40 some years ago, I was driving this Volkswagen Bug, and I was broke. But you can do this. You can do this. Okay. But you only have one chance. So give it all you got. Now, what I mean by you only have one chance in closing tonight, if you don't make it in 2020 in real estate, do you think your spouse, your significant other, or whoever is going to let you try it again in 2026? Or guys, you got one chance to make this work. Give it all you got. Learn a lot of things. Don't, you know, you have to take CE credit classes to renew your license every 2 years. Some of the classes are mandated, some of them are elective. Don't take your 18 hours and figure you got it done. Go to lots of classes. I'd go to a class every single month. Work on different things that are going to improve you as a professional. And so that when someone asks you a question, you actually have an answer to it, you know, and you're going to be okay. You don't have to know everything. Real estate is a wonderful business in that you have a broker, you have sales trainers, you have title companies, you have lenders that are all there to help you and to keep these deals and put these deals together. And I gave you my phone number. You're welcome to call me as well. Now, these classes are going to be held every other Tuesday. So we have a schedule. Dan will be publishing it on the school website. You're welcome to come in. This is our very first one. So I kind of got a little deep in some of the topics, but I only want to give you stuff that I know that's going to be of value to you sometime when you're facing a computer screen and having to make selections. So fair enough. Dan and I want you to be successful. We appreciate you coming to this school. We know that it's the best school out there, and we're doing these to help give you just that little bit extra edge. So we look forward to seeing you next Tuesday. And by the way, I'm doing another event next Thursday. I do another program on Thursday that talks a little bit more about practicality, but we also talk about test topics as well. And you can ask questions then. This is not part of the school. It's just something that I do every Thursday. And rickroller.com/Cramorama, CRAMO, Rama, RAMA. Okay, so thanks for Dan for letting me give that shameless plug. But if you want to come to that, you're welcome to come to that as well. You go to that link and then you can register for the class, and then we let you in. And there's no cost. It's just something that we do. So appreciate you guys. Hey, remember, you can do this. You can pass the exam the first time, and you can make it in this business as well. Real estate can change your life. You can bless so many lives, including your own. Remember, bless lives, make money. This is Rick Roller, and thanks for being here, and we'll see you in a couple of Tuesdays from now. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Rick. We really, really appreciate having Rick on here. He's very knowledgeable, a lot of years of experience, and an excellent instructor, as I'm sure you were all able to see today. So we want to give him a big thank you for being here. There's some thanks coming into the chat, so thank you, Rick, for doing that for us.
You're welcome.
So our next session is July 14th. That'll be in 2 weeks on Tuesday. You guys are welcome to tune in then. I put a link to the schedule for this class in the chat, and I also put the link that Rick mentioned for his Thursday meeting in the chat. I'll send that out again as well. But if you do have any other questions right now, we're happy to answer them. We'll probably let Rick get going. He's a busy guy. But yeah, do you have any other questions before we close up today? I don't see any other new questions. Feel free to, of course, email the school or call us at the school with any questions you have. The phone number is right on the website, and we can answer anything that you need. Thank you all for being here. Have a great night.